Okay, room is locked. All right. And we are on. We say all praises be to the Creator, all power to his people. In the name of Yahshua, the Black Revolutionary Messiah, I greet you, my brothers and sisters, in the spirit of truth and the words of peace. Shalom Aleichem. Giving a special salute to the Black Messiahs. Our motto is stop waiting for a Savior and be one. Stop waiting for a Savior and be one. Tonight, family, with all that's happening in the world, we're doing a brief live video with the Minister of Education, Brother Samario King. So we're going to talk about tonight what's going on in London. People are saying that racism does not exist in London, and the royal family is saying, people are saying it does exist. The royal family is pushing back, saying it does exist. So for someone who has traveled over there and traveled extensively across the world, unlike myself, got the Minister of Education in here tonight. So we're going to touch on global white supremacy. Does white supremacy or racism really exist in London? Or is it worse than the United States? Or is it everywhere? Or is it better in the United States? So I don't know. I've never been out of the country. So, brother, what's going on in the world, man? I mean, is it really racism in London that you've experienced, or is it just the same as the United States?
So I would say racism comes in different extremities and levels. And for the royal family of England, it's not just racism, it's a specific um, sect of people that they want to be in that family. So they are, hold up, I'm about to lose some power. Give me a second. They have the royal family of England is really a German family. And it's been a German family that's ruled England for like the past 500 years or something.
Really?
Yeah. So there used to be. Give me 1 second. There's there's a town in Germany called Wetten in Saxon, and this is the town that all of these the monarchs from the United Kingdom, Belgium, Germany, Bulgaria, Portugal, they all came from this one town. This town called Wetten. This guy Dietrich took over this castle, and he started his own house, the House of Wetten. And his kids eventually like took over this part of Germany. It's called Saxon, like Anglo-Saxons. Like that
Right.
was the part of Germany that they took over, and eventually they spread, and they spread through those specific countries. And like Leopold, King Leopold, who killed all of the Africans, he was part of this house. So
Wow.
out of the House of Wetten came the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. That's a German house, and the House of Hanover. Those were all German families that all came from this town, Wetten. And the Hanovers took over Great Britain and Ireland, and they were there. Like Queen Victoria, she was part of this house. The House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha was also a German house, and that's where the Belgians and King Leopold was from. Anyway, all these people like intermarried. They were cousins basically because they were all from the same town, and they would go out and they would marry their cousins and keep all of these monarchies basically in the family. Like the Russians and all of these people, they were all from this same like town in Germany. And what happened is like with Queen Victoria, she was like the last of the House of Hanover. The House of Hanover was the Germans, were the Germans who ruled Britain when they took over like India. Like up until Queen Victoria, she married a guy from the House of Saxe-Coburg, and when she died, of course, it took his name, so it turned into the House of Saxe-Coburg. And what happened is during World War I, the Germans were at war with the British, which was confusing to the British people. And there was a specific bomber called the Gotha that was bombing London, and it became so infamous that they talked about it on the news, and so it became a very a tough selling point to have the name of the plane that's bombing your town had the same name as your king. So what they did to win the people over is they changed their last names to Windsor. So they changed their name to the House of Windsor, and they did it to match Shakespeare's The Merry Wives of Windsor. Because they
Wow.
felt like that was a very nice name that people would accept, and that's what happened. And that's how they're named the Windsors now. But they're all Germans. They're all from like one German family. So they view passing their bloodline down as a very specific thing. Like it goes to these people from this neighborhood in Germany. Like that's who we intermarry with. That's why they all have hemophilia. Like they all have these similar genetic traits because they're all related.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they all look like that. That's why they all look the same way because they're all cousins. I mean, I don't know if I think it was a big deal when whatever the prince is now when he married Kate, because she wasn't from this particular like
Right.
neighborhood or whatever. So of course, if he's marrying like a half black, half American girl, they're gonna be like, wait a minute, this girl ain't even German. So it's racism, but at the same time, it's self-preservation. Like we looking out for our cousins from Wetton, Saxony, Anhalt.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Have you ever studied the African origins of Europe?
I have not. I do know that a lot of those, a lot of the monuments that they found in Europe were built by the Cometics when they were, exploring the world. That was at that time that was viewed as the bottom of the world. Like the Nile flows from Ethiopia down to Egypt, so that was viewed as the top of the world, and England was all those places were underneath. So when they went there and built those astronomical clocks like Stonehenge and all that, they also put their religions and their way of life up there. Like Saint Patrick is a famous Catholic saint for chasing the snakes out of Ireland. The
Right.
snake people is what it means. Like this man didn't actually chase snakes out. They were the snake people, and the snake people referred to the people who followed Isis. Like Isis is, Isis and Osiris, the Egyptian Greek version of the Egyptian religion has spread all through London and all through Ireland, and those were the people that they had to defeat to install Roman Catholicism, and they killed them all, and that's why that's a Catholic island now.
Have you ever heard it was the Druids that he actually chased out?
The Druids, yeah, that's who it
That's the
was.
same people?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
snake people.
Because they had snake ornaments on their right.
The snake
Right.
people, yeah. St. Patrick
Okay.
chased out the snake people.
Yeah, because I didn't make the connection that with the Druids though. I'm glad you explained that to me. I never.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So, and then of course the Moors in Andalusia, Spain, but that was like 700 AD. Like I think that was a much earlier presence of melanated people in those areas.
Now I've read this book,
Uh-huh.
African Presence in Early Europe, and it's edited by Dr. Ivan van Sertima. I've read this one.
Listening.
It's been a while now. And I picked this book up. I haven't read it yet, but now with everything going on and them talking about London and the racism, it's Ancient and Modern Britons by David McRitchie. I only have volume 2, but it looks just through flipping through it, it's talking about what we talked about, man. Ethnicity of early Europe. So yeah, I got to start reading this one. The third book I have tonight is Capitalism and Slavery
Oh
by
wow.
Eric Williams. This book really talks about the slave trade in England. And the way he talks about it, and this is kind of going along with our conversation tonight, what Eric Williams talks about is he takes it from nothing personal, it's just business standpoint. So, from what Eric Williams said, the slavery in Europe or England wasn't as much race based as it was in America. It was seen more as a business because, they had their own issues at the same time going on with their working class or feudalism.
Well,
So,
and it's funny. I feel like that's one of the funny things about that separated like British society from American society. American society, it was just black and white. In the British, it was like, there was the Protestants, and then the House of Foxburg and the Windsors, and then the Catholics were villains, and all these different groups of villains, and they couldn't be Protestant; they had to be Anglican. So I feel like just that whole extreme, separation and division, like, we are this specific type, like we are Germans
mhm,
from this village. I feel like that set the stage for a lot of, global racism, because this is extreme, like this distinguishing. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen in other societies, but I think once you start to view people as property, and part and business machines, then you know those machines get viewed as less than human.
mhm,
I have I guess one view of slavery in America is that if you were going to have the business of America at the time was agriculture, it was a
right.
plantation, and if you wanted to have the business of the moment, you needed slaves, like just point blank period, you know. And it was a evil enterprise. But if you wanted to be part of capitalism,
Mhm.
what are you gonna do?
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, but I always thought that even if you go back to James the First or quote King James unquote, you know, it's been scholars have said that the reason the Bible is written the way it is because of the classism amongst white Europeans, white people in Europe, the classism among themselves, because a lot of people in the Afrocentric community, they try to say, well, King James wrote the Bible to enslave African people, when in reality, they really weren't thinking about African people at that time to that degree. They were dealing with their own feudalism, and the Bible was written as a result of their own feudalism. The different classes, like you spoke about. You ever done any research on that?
On
James
King
the First,
James?
King James, yeah,
No, I'm gonna look him up now.
yeah. But that was the whole thing. The reason why,
He was from the Stewart House.
mhm, the
They
reason
were
why.
Scottish.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
The
this
reason
was
why
the
is
Germans overthrew them.
wow. The reason why it's written in the language it was to give a distinction between the learned class and the peasants, so to speak. Then you have the whole Protestant situation, and people got went to America, so it gets real crazy when you deal with that whole history of
I'm
English.
listening.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm listening.
yeah. It gets real crazy when you deal with that whole idea of racism and classism in Europe and how that really came about. But since you've been over there, did you experience any racial undertones when you were in Europe traveling
So
vacation?
Yes and no. I go out of my way when I go places like this to actually stay in black neighborhoods. So when I went to London, I stayed in a neighborhood called Brixton, which is a Jamaican neighborhood. So I didn't really experience a whole lot of racism from white people because I wasn't around a whole lot of white people. Um, I pretty much just did like if I wasn't at museum tours and touristy stuff, I was back in Brixton eating Jamaican food and going to the markets and stuff. So that part of it was cool. I think the one kind of racist encounter I had with British people was actually in Egypt. We were all on we were on a tour. We were all on one ship. Like we were sailing down. Now it was like our tour. It was several tour groups on one like ship, and there were these British people on there, and you could just tell they had like a really stank attitude. And we were part of our group was like there was an Australian couple and like a an American couple, but this British couple, these British people, they were very like standoffish. They didn't really speak. Um, and like we were doing yoga when they on the deck, and the guy like walked right beside me and like tripped over my foot, and I was like, "You didn't see me here?" And he's like, "Oh no, I didn't." And I was like, "Well, you're the one who fell." So it was just a weird static that I kind of felt.
Did you think that was more personal or cultural? Do you think that was an isolated case and everybody's not like that, or did you get the opinion that well, that's pretty much the culture over
I can't really say that I met any white British people anywhere else though.
there? Hmm.
Like all the British people I've ever met have been black, actually. So, mm, um, yeah, France it was the same way. I didn't really meet a whole lot of white people in France, but they were cool. I mean, they. I met a white lady in Amsterdam who was. The people in Amsterdam are extremely obsessed with black culture, hip hop, all black culture, especially through music. So, it's a little different there, but it's interesting that all of those are Germanic like countries.
Hmm.
Like Netherlands, Germany, and England, they all speak Germanic languages, so you can kind of understand the language if you understand English. Whereas like France and Spain and all those are Romance languages, so those are all based on Latin.
And Germany is also the birthplace of scientific racism.
Oh yeah, it's the last whole of the Neanderthals.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
I mean, they are
Yeah.
genetically. I mean, genetically, they are on the polar opposite extreme of totally melanated people.
Hmm.
And it worked out medically. That's what you see when you look at something like AIDS, like HIV. It it,
Hmm.
it attaches itself through a specific cell receptor site, CR32NR or something cell
Hmm.
receptor site. The more melanin you have, the more of those cell receptor sites you have, like up to
Hmm.
millions. The least melanated you have, you may not have any. To the
Right.
point that there's a group of people that are immune from HIV. They are Northern Europeans with blonde hair and blue eyes. They can get
Really?
it. They don't
Wow.
have the cell receptor sites, and they're also the ones who get cured the fastest. If you look at these people who are getting these who are being cured of HIV, like through these bone marrow transplants, they're mostly white people
Hmm. Hmm.
or Northern Europeans.
So, do you subscribe to what Dr. Frances Cress Welton wrote in the ISIS papers, where she said that racism or white supremacy is the result of the fear of white genetic annihilation?
Yes, I do. It makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
Um, because they are genetically recessive. If they go out and breed with any other race, the baby is not going to be white. You know, and they don't take up a lot of the population on the planet, and physically they can't compete naturally in a natural sense. You know, the sun peels their skin off and all that stuff. So yeah, they got to do something.
So white supremacy would be more a defense mechanism instead of a superiority aspect.
I mean, if you are from a genetic line of people that were raised in cold, where you had to, you know, fight for your food, and you know, huddled in these caves for thousands of years, versus people who, you know, grew up in these beautiful sunny fields with food and water and all that stuff. I think it would just change your disposition. And I think they just have, I think when you grow up in that like type of environment, it just gives you a much more warlike disposition.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because resources are scarce. If you have abundance, you don't really need to kill your neighbor and take
Right.
over his castle.
Michael Bradley writes about that in his book, The Iceman Inheritance.
Who does?
Michael Bradley. He's a
Okay.
Canadian, a white Canadian. He breaks that down in The Iceman Inheritance.
Uh-huh.
He deals with the theory of Western man's aggression and how that started.
Yeah, from cold weather.
Yeah, yeah.
I just come.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the book, what is his name? I always draw a blank. How Europe underdeveloped Africa.
Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. In that book, you know, it tries to get to the rationale and reason why the aggression in Africa. Dr. John Henry Clark also, you know, he talks about it. He said, you know, what we want is African people with a thought out icebox.
Say what?
He said that, you know, what would African people want with Europe? What would they want with a thought out icebox? What would African people want with a thought out icebox?
True. True.
He said the worst thing we can do to them is leave them alone to their own misery.
Well, yeah, because their economy is built off of, you know, Africa, not just resources but cheap labor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the most expensive and precious metals in the world, they're all mining in Africa now for
Mm-hmm.
pennies. So they have to keep those countries poor and disorganized and run by public leaders so they can keep getting that stuff as cheap as possible so they can sell it for as much
Mm-hmm.
as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Cobalt and all that stuff. Um, and then, you know, labor at this point now, the Chinese are using the Africans for labor.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chinese, you know, were manufacturing goods for everybody else. So now there's, you know, now, like you buy, you know, high fashion pocketbook from some Italian designer, it'll say made in Italy, but in Italy it got the label. It was assembled. You got some stitches in China, but most of it was made in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you know everybody needs Africa for all of these different things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's just I feel like right now it's like a testing playground or something. They'll test these weapons, test these vaccines.
Hmm. Walter Rodney, and that's whose name I couldn't think of, in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. He has a very interesting theory. He says in that book that whatever mentality that a people had going into the Iron Age, that's what determined world domination. His theory is that when the Africans went into the Iron Age, they had in their mind to build, you know, since they were already in an agricultural environment, to build things dealing with agriculture. They used that technology to deal with agriculture. But when the European not having that, when they went through the Iron Age, they built weapons. You ever heard that theory?
I have not. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've always thought was fascinating is that the Chinese were actually the ones who came up with gunpowder and
Gunpowder, right.
paper and printing
Hmm.
But I don't know if they use it for guns or if they use it for fireworks. But but
Fireworks.
but the Europeans certainly did figure it out.
Hmm.
They said, we're gonna
Hmm.
make some weapons with this.
Yeah, and that's through my research. The Chinese really used it for fireworks. It was the European who really used it for gunpowder. But if you ever get a chance to read that book, Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, he really goes into that. He really goes
Okay.
into that. Excellent book. Excellent book. I recommend that for everybody. So, just a lot going on in the world, brother. Um, didn't want to hold you too long tonight, but this is what we do on Thursday nights, family. This is the first time we actually did a live broadcast. But every Thursday night, we have a study group. And this division of the research division of the Black Messiah is a stick, and that stands for Society to Increase Cultural Knowledge. So every Thursday night at 7 p.m., we have a study group. So if you ever want the link, just inbox me. Some of this is, like I said, the first time we ever did it live, but sometimes, most of the time, the meetings are closed. So for those watching this video, if you ever want a link, feel free to hit me up. So, brother, before we close out, is there anything you want to add to the discussion tonight? Anything we didn't touch on that you want to touch on?
Um, no, I know we were gonna talk about the royal family, but I've always thought it was fascinating where they get their money from. And it's funny. That's the one thing that I can't really find a whole lot of information on.
Hmm.
I know I know they're invested in shale oil company and
Mhm.
they have, real estate and all that stuff, but where's the money come from? I
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
know.
but it's, I mean,
They
from
get they get
dominating.
they get public subsidies for I did read a little bit about it, and they get public subsidies for palace maintenance, public relations, and travel costs at about $42 million a year, and other government agencies pay them about 8 million for the same thing. So about $50 million a year.
But isn't that wealth just handed down from centuries? Because at one point they were saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire, and the British Empire had for probably centuries,
Mm-hmm.
the largest navy. So I would think through all of that, there's probably the wealth was just handed down from generation to generation. That's what I would think.
I mean, yeah, but a lot of that wealth is just gold that they stole.
Mhm.
They probably can't like disclose that.
So you're talking now about like British Petroleum and all that stuff?
Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
they have um shares. I mean, because they had monopolies. They had royal monopolies on all of their goods and services for like the longest time. So when they became a government, like did they keep all those shares? How does
Mhm.
that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, brother. It's been an honor as usual. Thank you for the enlightening discussion. As always, I learned a lot. I learned a lot. So, as always, we leave it with the Black Messiah motto: stop waiting for a savior and be one. Shalom.
So